Welcome back to the Sensitive Shift podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation on sensitivity and careers, professional life, and entrepreneurship. If you haven't listened to part 1, we recommend that you go back and check it out first. So Anna, here we're talking about leadership, entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a bit more about how HSPs thrive or not in leadership positions and what tend to be their strengths and weaknesses?
Yes. As we mentioned in part 1, and also what's mentioned in The Highly Sensitive Person, the book by Dr. Elaine Aron, she talks about this idea that in aggressive societies, or the Western societies that we have as well, there's sort of like these two classes that rule together, and she calls them the ruler warriors and the priestly advisors. And the first ruler warriors are more likely to be aggressive or more likely to be the doers, the action takers, and they're likely to be non-HSPs. And the priestly advisors are the ones that we can imagine are the ones that provided the strategy and also, when necessary, restrained the more impulsive warriors in this story that we're making, right? Who reminded them of the consequences of their actions or looked at the different outcomes. And those advisors are more likely to be us, the HSPs. And she's very clear to say that it's just a theory. So this isn't based on research. It hasn't been proven, but it's kind of a way to imagine the different kinds of people and the dynamics that are needed to work together for societies to work and to work well. So she says we need our warriors and we need our advisors. We need the doers. We need the thinkers. But if we think about that, then it starts to lead us to think, what does this mean for HSPs and leaders? Does it mean that we don't make good leaders? Does it mean that we're not doers, that we're only thinkers? And also, how can we interpret this in a modern day context?
Yeah, because I think that puts into question the idea of what does it mean to be a leader? So maybe these stereotypes conversation or these attributes that we generally associate with someone in a leadership position. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about that, because being HSP might work well or maybe against some of these preconceived notions.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the sort of stereotypical way or the traditional way that we think about what it means to be a leader and what it means to be a good leader. And from what I've seen, yes.
Yeah.
So from what I've seen, there tends to be a kind of image of what a leader should be or generally is. And words that come to mind are words like authoritative, ambitious, dominant, confident, and to a certain extent, emotionally detached. Not really the typical description of an HSP, right?
Not really, no.
But is it really true that there's only one way to be a good leader?
I mean, these attributes would not be what I would use as good leaders. Not all of them, at least. Yeah.
For us, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reflection here, or at least I'd like to think, that there can be many, if not all, kinds of people with different personality types who might have different characteristics that would, yes, both contribute and also take away from their ability to be good and effective leaders. There can be all kinds of different leaders, and we might be looking for different kinds of leaders in different scenarios. So a warrior in the middle of a war is a different kind of leader than, I'm going to say, a manager in a mental health clinic,
right?
For example. So the context is important at the same time too.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think adding this idea of context, because you have different kinds of leaders. You have spiritual leaders, you have leaders within like a very traditional corporate environment type
Mm-hmm.
leadership. You have leaders, like, for example, in a therapy session, maybe as the therapist, I would be considered the leader of the session. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that term is also very dependent on that context of the different roles that we play in different parts of our lives. And I think it's also very culturally dependent. And even the
Yeah.
attributes that we associate are culturally dependent, because in our culture, in a certain context, we might think, oh, this is what a good leader is, versus in another part of the world, for another type of context, this is what they would need as a good leader for their country or for
Yeah.
their religious gatherings, you know?
I agree. And there can be so many different ways to be
Mm-hmm.
a leader. Since we're here to talk about HSPs, I would love to share, and I've done a little bit of research on this, so I'm prepared.
Yes,
I'm
tell
prepared to
us.
share a few different reasons why HSPs, who we remember have a lot of the time these special strengths, of empathy, of sensing subtleties, so that attention to detail,
Mm.
that depth of processing, so attention to patterns and meaning from what's happening and pulling meaning. These attributes and qualities might actually make really great leaders too.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the topics that, as I was doing the research, just really came through over and over again was that leaders who are sensitive are just especially good at tuning into their team.
Mm.
They're especially aware of team dynamics. They notice earlier when people need more attention or more coaching, more feedback, more personal time,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be. And it doesn't mean there aren't weaknesses too, because I'm also prepared to talk about those.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that there is a unique strength here with HSPs who might find themselves in leadership positions or might desire to be in leadership positions. And I want any of our HSPs listening to know that they have something unique to bring in
Mm-hmm.
those positions. So there's someone, a name that kept coming back. It's the name is John Hughes. He is an HSP, naturally, but also a pastor, so a spiritual
Mm.
leader, a preacher, and a teacher. And he wrote an article on LinkedIn that actually Dr. Aaron referenced in a
Oh,
separate
nice.
interview. And so when she referenced it, I thought, oh,
There we go.
I need to talk about this.
This is the goal of our
Um,
podcast, is the one
this,
that you
this is
reference.
the gold standard.
Uh,
And he talks about three specific abilities or strengths that, in his opinion, make HSPs uniquely qualified or effective leaders. This is what sets them apart. It doesn't mean better, it just means different. And I will tell you about them. So, the first thing is their ability to sense subtleties. And I mentioned this before because this is one that came back often. It's
mhm,
sensing subtleties, and especially within their teams, especially with the emotional state of the teams and
mhm,
the team members. They can notice quicker and they can adjust quicker when they're emotionally in touch with their teams. So this is I always say like a reactive. It's fast acting because they will notice when something needs course correcting and they'll care enough to make the change as well. So, both of those. The second attribute after sensing subtleties is depth of processing. And depth of processing, sometimes I just like to think about that as yes, it's meaning making. It also literally takes time. So it
Mm-hmm.
means that there's almost like this time delay, which again, maybe not great for all leadership scenarios where really fast decision making is necessary, but it can be really interesting where you need to be making important decisions that require that reflection and analysis
Yeah.
before acting. And there's a kind of picture that I'd have in my mind with this scenario of the type of leader that is, let's say, in a team meeting, conference room table set up, lots of people around, and this is the team leader that's quiet for the beginning of the meeting, that lets others speak, that listens, that observes, that reflects, that looks at the team dynamic, that looks at how much of the team wants this thing versus how much wants the others, and who's saying what, and where are the interests.
Mm.
And this kind of idea of the leader speaks last. So once all the ideas are on the table and it's possible to synthesize them, um, this is then where decision making can take place. And that's a different style of leadership. And lastly, so we had sensing subtleties, we had depth of processing. Lastly, there's a term that we actually haven't mentioned before, but it's this quality of resonance or resonant leadership. And this is basically a fancy way of saying the ability to soak in everything that the group is saying and feeling about a situation, especially the nonverbal and emotional information, and then being able to take decisions and lead from a position of empathy and understanding. It's this kind of big picture thinking, but big picture not just in information, but it's also in emotion and impact on people. And this comes naturally to HSPs and HSPs in leadership positions.
Something that really resonated with you talked about the depth of processing was, we have this image of like a leader needing to be able to make decisions quickly and react quickly. And I often think about, especially in our line of work, and sometimes in healthcare, yes, you need to make decisions quickly because sometimes it is a question of life or death. And also, it's also being able to make the difference between when is it a question of urgency versus this is not a question of urgency. It's important. It's not necessarily urgent. And so it's actually a skill to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
that discernment, constantly working in a state of urgency when there's actually a real need for discernment between important and urgent is crucial, because otherwise you're running
Mm-hmm.
your team constantly on this adrenaline that everything is an emergency, and then you're running your team to the ground really really fast because people can't keep
Right.
up with that rhythm when it's not necessary. When it's necessary, of course you got to sustain that, but even in those cases there are systems in place for people to be able to step away from that work, because you can't run like that for a very long time. And I think that
Yeah.
ability as a leader to make that difference is super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you said that. And naturally, as I'm listening to that, I was sort of picturing, oh, I wonder what I would do in a situation where there's urgency all the time and this kind of thing. And truthfully, out of self-awareness, it's not the kind of um, place that I think I would thrive, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of there are positions that are high urgent
Mm-hmm.
emergent
Yeah.
situations, where decisions need to be made very quickly and all the time, and that's probably not the place that I would thrive, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
And not every leadership position is like that, so
No.
that's good for us because
Yeah.
it means we can choose the ones that are at the level of stimulation in terms of urgency, can have an aspect of challenge
Mm-hmm.
and excitement to be making big important decisions quickly, So there's something here for everyone.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, so we talked about the strengths, and it would be unfair to only talk about the strengths without giving the full picture because we're talking about the full picture. So, as leaders, I'm also going to add that something that we may struggle with more compared to the strengths that we might have is, and especially within team dynamics, is the idea of any situations where we would need to be giving corrective feedback, for example. And what that means is because there is the emotion sensing and the connection to the team and sensing the team dynamic, it also means we don't really want to rock the boat. We don't want to accidentally hurt other people's feelings. But I want to say that it doesn't mean we won't do it. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean we avoid all confrontation or
Mhm.
feedback because that's not so great. So it just means that as long as we're able to deliver feedback with tact, with clarity, with authenticity, it can be a win win if we combine this with the appropriate skills for giving good feedback.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to our last episode on relationships and hard conversations and
Yeah.
conflict resolution. It's not easy. And also, we can do it. We
Yeah.
just need the skills and the practice. One last thing to note is that, and this comes from Dr. Aaron, is that HSPs do tend to find leadership positions more stressful. So that just is something to mention because it's an important consideration when we're deciding what kind or if we want to be in leadership positions. It means that when we are in those positions, the skills that we need for self care and boundaries and all of the skills that we talked about in our season so far are especially important in these scenarios because it can be more challenging and it can be more stressful.
Mhm. Have you been, Anna, in a leadership position or in a situation where you had to make decisions for a group or a team? And what did you find was easier? What did you find harder?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate to have always been in leadership positions that weren't high stress for
Mm.
me. So I'm glad that I don't have, too many horror stories on that. I'll give maybe just like a playful example, which is in university, I was the president of a sort of student run cafe on campus. And this
Oh.
was like a great honor and responsibility. And I found that it's going back a few years now, but I found that overall, I really enjoyed being able to take decisions for the group. And I remember at the time I took being a leader very seriously. And I was listening to all of these leadership podcasts and all of this is so me, right? But all of
I
this
love it.
information about how to run meetings effectively and how to make sure everyone felt heard and how do you nurture your team. And I remember trying all these different things that I had heard from my podcast and just wanting everyone to feel really involved and listened to. And I invited feedback and I held meetings in different places and I was just playing with all kinds of things. And to me, I remember feeling like that was so much fun and I really felt because I had previously been still involved in the cafe, but not in that position in other years. And so I had really felt like I had something to bring and something to contribute.
Mm.
And um, yeah, I had really enjoyed it at that time. Yeah.
That's great. I
It
had no
didn't bring
idea
me
you did
stress.
that. I love it.
Yeah, it's a fun example because there's a lot of good memories. I wasn't making any life or death decisions, but we were making fun decisions like what to put on the menu and how to collaborate with the different providers, the different local food
Oh, nice.
places and things like that, and how
Hmm.
to advertise, like all the kind of, it's just more fun questions, and everyone had great ideas.
Yeah, but it is formative, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Shall we turn to entrepreneurship
Yes.
and that spirit of being a leader?
Yes. Same question, right? So, can HSPs be good entrepreneurs?
Yeah,
Because, and the reason we're thinking about this, right, is because it's a lot of responsibility. Actually, it's all on you a lot of the time, and especially at the
yeah.
beginning. Like, you're it, and
You
you have
are
to be
it.
everyone and wear all the hats. And my answer, I'll give the short answer and the long answer. So the short answer is absolutely yes. We can be incredible entrepreneurs and we can be very successful as entrepreneurs. And the long answer is more nuanced.
Perfect.
Of course, we're going to add the layers. I think this comes back to the idea that we can be overwhelmed by all the hats. There's the good in the responsibility and the ability to set our limits, to make decisions, to choose what we're doing, and to choose things that are meaningful and important to us. And there's like the shadow of the overwhelm, and to be careful
Mm.
and to pace ourselves. And so, what I'll say is that there's actually somebody who is very specialized at talking about this topic. So I'm going to reference them. And this person, her name is Heather Dominick, an HSP again. And she's also a business coach. She's an entrepreneur. She wrote a book called Different, The Highly Sensitive Leadership Revolution. She has a coaching program and all kinds of amazing resources. And why I wanted to highlight her is because she actually has identified 12 strengths, and then she has the corresponding shadows. She calls them shadows of the strength of highly sensitive entrepreneurs. So, just to give you a little kind of preview of what that sounds like, is she talks about while there are several strengths that HSPs have, it can be hard to find success without overwhelming or sacrificing their own or our own well being.
Mm.
And so, our strengths in extremes can sometimes turn into shadows, the kind of lesser, the more dangerous parts of our strengths sometimes. So there's a balance to be found. So
Mm.
for example, she identifies the strength of empathy that we've talked about often on the pod. The strength of tuning in and responding to the needs of your team or to the needs of your customers, to be able to know what they need and anticipate and deliver on that. Um, and this can help you to lead effective teams with positive dynamic, respond to your clients' needs effectively, and create the best products. But the shadow of empathy is the feeling of over responsibility.
Mhm.
Empathy to the extreme of feeling responsible for the feelings or experiences of others can actually be counterproductive if it leads you to be, for example, finding difficulty to delegate tasks, or if you find it because of empathy difficult to give feedback. If empathy prevents you from actually empowering others
Mhm.
to take responsibility and learn from their mistakes, so you start to take on those responsibilities instead, it's still empathy, but it's at an extreme where it starts to hinder
Mm.
instead of help. And she talks about the shadows of HSP entrepreneurs a little bit more. We won't talk about all of them today, but I'll name a few for you just to get a little bit of a taste for these. And some of those shadows are perfectionism, procrastination, overwhelm, overwork, overprotection, analysis paralysis, shame, people pleasing, self criticism, judgment of self or others, and health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Agath, I know that you have a new business.
Yeah.
You've launched and you're running a new business. And I wonder if there's anything from what I just said that speaks to you as an HSP. Are there any strengths or even shadows? Because I just mentioned all of those shadows that stood out for you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you feel you need to be mindful of because we care about you and we want to take care of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's so much to say. There's so much to say. Um, I think the first thing I'm going to say is that, when we started this conversation, you said it's so nuanced. And my business, as you know, Anna, but now everyone will know, my business is called Nuances, and in French, Nuance. And it is a mental health consulting business. I launched it last month officially, but I had been working on it for over a year. And I am a one woman show, so I do almost everything on my own. In the past few months, I had a little bit of help from the marketing point of view from a fellow HSP actually that I met in a networking event. We like gravitated toward each other, so that was a fun story. And it's been quite the journey. I will say that, and it's only the beginning. I think about how this business, its foundation, is built on so many parts of my sensitivity, but also my beliefs, my values, my progressive view on where I think the mental health field should be. And that's why I created it. And so I think there is both in what Nuance stands for, a lot of those values are part of the foundation in terms of the work that we do is about making for a more sensitive world. And then in the way that I work, I try very, very, very hard to walk the talk. And so that means for me that I don't believe in working in a culture that is overworked, overburdened, that only cares about product and not about process. And so I try so much to approach my work at Nuance from this perspective. And so, yes, I do feel like sometimes like the perfectionist point, like the balance is a bit uneven at some points in my journey. And then at the same time, it goes back to being even because I go back to these foundational values of if I'm not feeling aligned today, so if I feel like I'm approaching my work from a point of view of like I'm feeling guilt or I'm feeling like I should instead of I want to do this work, then I'm not putting in place the values of both the way that I need to be working in my business as a highly sensitive person, but also as putting in practice the values that Nuance stands for. So I'm very careful. I'm also speaking from a place of privilege because I can afford to walk that way and build it that way. I am still working full time at my other job, so it does give me more more space to build found like the foundations, but it also is difficult because I can't put as much time, or the time that I put in has to be very intentional because I don't have as much energy to put into it. So it's very layered. It's very complex because there's so many points to talk about here, from both like my style as a worker, what nuance stands for, and also going into business making. And I think part of the research that both you and I also explored was that HSPs often gravitate toward self-employment or building their own
Mm-hmm.
view. They build their own view of what they can't find in the world. And that was
Yes.
exactly why I created
So
Nuance,
true.
because I couldn't find what I was looking for when it came to mental health in the world.
Yeah.
So I want to build it. And I know it's going to be a
Yeah.
lot of work, but I need to do it. That is my purpose.
It's meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I hear that. And I'm curious, about just the process of becoming an entrepreneur for you. What do we in the process of becoming an entrepreneur? And I think, especially starting a first business, there's so much of a learning curve.
Mm.
And I'm wondering what you've learned, or what would you want our audience, our fellow HSPs to know about
Mm.
entrepreneur life?
Yeah, feel free to add to this because Anna, you also have experienced the entrepreneur life yourself. I think
Mm-hmm.
authenticity remains my first answer. So I think doing the exploration around why are you creating what you want to create, and to always come back to that. Whatever your practice is, to come back to your authenticity, whether it is journaling, therapy, creating art, talking to other people, having a group of fellow entrepreneur who will validate you and your experience and your service and or your product, whatever it is that you're creating. I think coming back to what you stand for and what you're creating for
Yeah.
is very, very, very important, because it's so easy to get caught into the machine of, at the end of the day, you're a business, so you got to sell. And I don't want to get caught in that. I have to find the balance between, like, yes, I need to sell, but I also want to sell in a way that's authentic. So what does that mean? Like, I have to find my own way, because it's not my style to
Yeah.
do a one size fits all. So I have to find my own way of making meaningful connections, and for people to feel called by my work and want to work with me. Like, I care about these connections. I don't want to just sell to the first interested person, even though they have no idea what I do. I don't think that's going to work. So, yeah, I think authenticity
Yeah.
to come back.
Yeah. I totally agree with that as well. I think uh for me, it's something very similar in the sense of when I've been super clear about my why,
Mm,
and I've just really believed in what I was doing, everything was a lot easier. Then there were moments where it felt a little murky, and moments where I was not quite sure, and everything was harder when I
mm,
was in those moments. So to be so clear and to understand how you are helping people and why you are helping people, what you bring and what your value is in whatever product or service you have, makes all the difference, really. And I would add as well is, um, especially I think we're in sort of a similar boat here, is when you have a full-time job and then entrepreneurship is like an addition.
mm,
When you're juggling many things, I can't speak to what it feels like to be a full-time entrepreneur because I don't have that experience, but when you're juggling um, more than one kind of career field or project, then I think being able to have some limits and
mm.
boundaries
Yeah.
is, it's always an important skill. It's especially important because your time starts to be blocked off during work hours, and then you're setting yourself some work hours for your own project, and to not forget about the rest of life and friends and
Yes.
leisure and fun and self-care and health and whatever other values that you have or other fields of life, because things start to get really busy and really booked up, and we know that we can thrive with busy lives. And also it takes a little planning and it takes a little organization too.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you said that because it's very, very important. So, in the spirit of talking about work and careers, we're going to play a little game which kind of resembles our Would You Rather. However, it's going to be called Deal or No Deal. Copyright. All right.
Yes.
So,
Agathe, to you, scenario 1. So you have a colleague or team member who is struggling with their workload due to some personal issues. Do you offer to take on some of their tasks to alleviate their stress or not? For example, tell them to prioritize self care or to seek additional support. Do you want to make a deal or
uh,
no deal?
this is very hard because I think it's very context specific.
Yeah.
I think I want to say deal with many conditions with many like sub lines, the fine lines, the fine writing.
Mm-hmm. Fine print.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine print, exactly. With putting some boundaries around like how long is that going to go on for, and then making sure that my boundaries are being set around how much I can take on for how long,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that yes, this person absolutely does prioritize self-care and seek additional support. I don't think that has anything to do with me taking on more of the work, because I think that should happen regardless of what happens to the workload. um but I think in terms of what that would do,
Mm-hmm.
what that would entail for me would be like, I can help out, but there's a few things that need to be ironed out first. And also, I will say it's context specific. So my answer might change depending on where it is.
It's nuanced.
Yes, as everything is.
Yes.
Okay, Anna.
Okay.
A team member
Yes.
asks for your opinion on their presentation, which you believe could use significant improvement. Do you offer honest feedback, risking hurting their feelings, or generic praise to avoid hurting their feelings? Deal or no deal?
Hmm. Yeah, a deal. A deal. I would offer honest feedback, and I'm going to do it in my way. I'm going to do it in my HSP way. So I think feedback, just the most respectful thing to the person is to be able to give them honest feedback, but I'm going to do it with gentleness, and I'm going to start with the things that I like. I'm going to start with what I understand they're trying to say. And again, like context specific, but I think if I can do it with authenticity, if I can do it tailored to the person who's in front of me and what I know that they can do or what I know that they mean, I want them to succeed. So I'm going to be honest, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be brutal or
Mhm.
harsh.
Yeah. Anna, tell us, what will you do or what did you do this week to nurture your sensitivity?
This upcoming week, I am lucky enough to have a day off. So I have a long
Ooh.
weekend. and I'm going to use it for some leisure time, some time away, and recharge in nature,
Nice.
and just a little bit more rest than usual. I need it. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, do some
What about you?
leisuring.
I'm going to leisure away. Yeah.
So next week, well, so big news is that I started going to dance with you. So I'm going to
Yes.
continue going to dance with you
Woohoo.
this upcoming weekend and week for a bit and see how I feel. And I think, it was really nice to do that with you and to connect back to that part of my life. And although I struggle a bit with that performance aspect that we talked about in other
Yeah.
episodes, I enjoy just challenging my mind to be like, oh, we're in this setting. Immediately, it brings up a bit of the perfectionist in me. And also, like, let's relax into it and have fun. And so I like actually to, it's not easy, but I like to challenge myself to see how far I've come as well in terms of being able to regulate some of those feelings that come up. So that's been interesting as well.
Oh, I love that. We've come full circle with performing arts and
Yeah.
opening doors to performing arts for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, a little disclaimer as we end this episode that we are discussing contents related to personal wellness, but they do not constitute advice. We acknowledge that each experience is different and that if you're looking for specific support, then you may consider one on one professional help individualized to you. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to check our next episode that will be on HSPs and relationship with food, exercise, and diet culture. That's a big one for you, Anna.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm excited.
Yay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.